Good evening and welcome to the Modise Network.
Tonight, we put the National Development Plan under the spotlight as we look at its end objectives and implementation. Currently, South Africa is in economic trouble, and we ask, where did we go wrong and how do we overcome? With National Planning Commissioner Dr. Miriam Altman and economist Dr. Thabi Leoka.
I'm Tim Modise, and thank you for joining me this evening. And also join our discussion on social media, on Twitter. The hashtag is the Modise Network. And this evening, big topic of the economy. The National Development Plan was adopted by the South African government in 2012 as a framework approach to solving socio-economic problems of the country. Its focus is to give guidance to how the triple challenges of inequality, poverty and unemployment can be substantially reduced by the year 2030. It is an ambitious plan with specific activities and milestones to be achieved along the way to 2030. But currently, South Africans are up in arms about the increase in prices of fuel and other consumer goods, with the opposition parties, for instance, calling for marches and parliamentary debates on the matter. On the other hand, the government has been announcing promises of foreign direct investment in the economy. But as we speak, Statistics South Africa has just told us that we are suffering job losses and unemployment is currently standing at 27.2%. Well, when you adjust the numbers, it goes to more than 32%. Just over a week ago, South Africa hosted the 10th BRICS Summit with promises of increased trade and other agreements that seem like they will improve South Africa's economic growth. I'm saying seem like, but will those agreements have an impact? That's the question. My guests this evening are Commissioner on the National Planning Commission, Dr. Miriam Altman, and she's joined by economist Dr. Thabi Leoka. Good evening, ladies. Pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you. Good evening.
All right. I've outlined some of the issues. There are plenty. We'll try and pull them together. I haven't even said anything about land, but I think it would be helpful, Miriam, to start with you and talk about the history of the National Development Plan. It's been hailed as one of the big ideas that come 2030 will have sorted our problems out. But tell me briefly what the whole story of the NDP is.
Well, let's come back to what the main idea was.
Yeah.
In many governments, you have a national treasury that is brokering resources across government, and the concern within the ANC anyway was that that was the main location for decision making and that we needed a National Planning Commission. So a National Planning Commission was set up. The issue in South Africa, as we well know, is that we're still struggling with apartheid legacy, with in terms of education, the spatial legacy, inequality, poverty, and we need dramatic change. So what the plan does is it gives a vision, firstly, of the uppermost targets in relation to changing the status quo, the current situation of the day, and then in a granular way, how do we get there? Now, what I should say is some people feel skeptical when we say, well, we need to create 11 million jobs, we need to have full employment, we need to eradicate poverty, but you need to have a vision. You need to have a vision to break out. We didn't say it would happen. We said, here are the targets, this should be our aspiration, and this is how to get there. Now what we're doing as the NPC is we're doing a review of where we've come to in relation to where we should have been by now, and what we need to do to course correct, because we know we're not on the right path.
I'll come back to the details of what the National Development Plan is all about, but the South African public generally wonder, where does it fit in the scheme of bigger things? We've had GEAR previously, we've had ASGISA, we have Freedom Charter that ANC refers to as the government now and again. We've got the conferences on the other side, we've got NEDLEC, and then you throw in the different stakeholders with their different interests, and then an average person in South Africa wonders, where do we come into play here? Where is what? What are the main features of the NDP?
Well, let's talk about what the National Planning Commission is, maybe. It is a confusing soup of different organizations and processes. The National Planning Commission is an independent advisory body sitting in the presidency, meant to be speaking truth to power, and not just to government, by the way, to society as well, to be laying out a vision for the future and to be making sure and holding the various parties to account in relation to that pathway. The difference between NEDLAC is a different kind of body. We're sitting in the presidency and step by step trying to align the planning system. So if I can just give you a very quick example, we're about to put out planning legislation in the country. You would think you already have it, but we don't. One of the challenges in the country, just to give an example, is that in the three spheres of government, around, say, urban planning, for example, you've got national, provincial, and local. They don't articulate. They don't line up. So when you see the apartheid space economy not changing, you see settlements going there, sanitation doesn't seem to come along, jobs are being located somewhere else, etc. That's a problem of the parts of government not coming together and not having the right planning frameworks and, sticks and carrots. That's the kind of thing we're starting to weigh in on so that we do start course correcting, because we know there's a problem.
Now, Thabi, give me an economist perspective on the NDP. When you look at it, how do you define it, firstly, for yourself? And when you take it on roadshows, how do you explain it to other people?
So the NDP, for many economists, was supposed to be the holy grail. As Miriam said, this is the path of South Africa's economic growth. And by 2030, we should have reduced the unemployment rate. We should have grown the economy by X amount. And so we thought that this is a plan where a lot of the government departments are coordinated and follow this path towards this economic plan towards 2030. And we speak to investors a lot, and this is the plan that I guess we promoted. We said we're back. South Africa has had many plans, RDP, GEAR, ASGISA, but this is actually the one that is going to stimulate economic growth, deal with the structural problems of employment and poverty and the education problem as well. And the disappointing thing for me is that by 2030, so less than a year of its launch, there was still no buy-in from government. And the problem here is that you started to see Labour tear it apart, and then certain departments saying actually doesn't speak to what we're trying to achieve. And the whole point of this policy or this plan is to have coordination so that you don't have duplication. So you see a lot of duplication currently that's going on in government, and this is what Miriam spoke about earlier. Duplication is costly. So you have, to either start a business, do you go to trade and industry, or do you go to small business department? And you get in many instances that many departments actually do the same thing. And for even an investor coming into South Africa, they have to then speak to 3 different departments to just get to
and that's
one
answer. National level for that matter.
That's
right?
at national level. This is before you get to the provinces.
And municipalities.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so you need this coordination and you need this common vision. Because we often ask ourselves, what type of economy is South Africa? What type of country do we want? And once we answer that, then we can have policies that speak to the country that we want. Are we going to be an export-led economy? What are we exporting? What is our manufacturing sector doing to enable this export? What is our education system doing to enable the creation and the creativity and the employment that is needed in order for us to have this economy that we want that will grow? But without these plans and these coordination and things speaking to each other, different departments at local, provincial, national level, then you just have a system that doesn't work. And this is what we have currently, that a lot of the system and a lot of the great ideas and plans are not speaking to each other. And everyone is doing things in their silos. And you don't have that one vision that we're trying to achieve. And really that is the disappointing part about the NDP. And I think that we need to revive it. And I'm glad to hear that the NPC is looking at reviving it. And I think that we need to now stick to deliverables, make sure that we reach the targets that are set up in the NDP. The other thing I just wanted to say quickly is that I don't want to diminish it. And I think that if you look at economies like India and China, they are on their 13th, 14th 5-year plans. So their plans started in the 1960s and 50s. This is what made India and China who they are currently, the countries
but
that they are.
here's my concern, though. You know, in 1994, it was great because political freedom was coming, and many South Africans, black South Africans specifically, felt now we're going to take the future, the destiny of our lives into our hands, and things are going to look even better. And then they count the years, 24 years down the line. They say, but why does it sometimes feel like we are regressing, we're not making any progress whatsoever? Anyway, the NDP has been introduced. It's 6 years or so in existence. Still, people ask, what does it mean for me as an average South African, right, who may not sit in meetings where these things are discussed? I'm not an investor. But at what point should a South African feel like this is what the NDP, the National Development Plan, is supposed to do for me? Miriam?
Well, let's talk about, you know, how people can engage. The National Planning Commission is in the service of the whole country, by the way. When we wrote the plan, a lot of our thinking, in fact, was about giving voice even to civil society. It's to guide government, guide private behavior, but also to give voice. So people should find themselves within the plan as well and use it as a way of holding to account. If I can just take one very simple example. We talk about how principals of schools should be appointed. We know there's a problem. The Minister of Education last year came out with a report about corruption and the appointment of school principals, just as a very basic example. In the plan, we talk about it. We speak about the ethos and the capabilities of principals. Now, so the department is moving on that. Many principals are retiring now. We say, as the Planning Commission, therefore you have an opportunity to do something significant about that problem. Now, it's going to be important that SGBs, you know, school governing bodies, that parents are made aware of what these things are and are weighing in. So, because they're the ones who are at the coalface, it's their children that are affected by that. That's an example of where it should dovetail and where it becomes real.
Well, then
it should become real.
And then the education departments, do they know? Maybe the National Education Department, yes, but what about the provincial level? Because I'm asking the level, the question, because there seem to me, it seems like there are inconsistencies, right? You find in Gauteng, a school is launched every month. In the Eastern Cape, they've got a backlog of toilets, and then you read reports that money has been allocated but has not been spent towards the infrastructure. Obviously, different imbalances that may lead to these inconsistencies.
That was the problem I was raising earlier in relation to the housing example of the problem where we've got the three spheres of government that aren't aligning around these things. And what we have to remember, you know, when we talk about the system of local government, we didn't have a proper system of local government pre-94. I mean, let's just remember. So the whole system is new. We have to remember that. The education system is effectively new. Now, it doesn't necessarily work well, but you've got to get the muscle moving. Now, what we're doing in the National Planning Commission is we're putting together a process of narrowing in government's top targets to about 50. So in other words, government now tracks thousands of targets. We're now saying, as the National Planning Commission, we want government to zero in on 50 top targets, which make it impossible to play around with the kind of thing that Thabi was raising. If that makes sense. It means that becomes absolutely transparent to the citizenry as to what they should expect, to government officials in all spheres of government to know what absolutely must get delivered. These are things that we're trying out to try to make sure that the plan gets implemented across this big, you know, government and civil society.
I raised several points about the different policies, as well as the institutions, if you will, that have been established, the NEDLEX and the different role players and their influence on how South Africa is managed. There was reference to the unions earlier on, which lead to even more confusion. If you are unemployed, you don't know who's speaking for you, Thabi.
That's correct, and again, it leads to we need a coordinated system where we know where to go if we need either to start a business or you are unemployed. Currently, we don't, and it's an indication of systems and processes that are not working. I don't think that the public, there's a great communication to the public by government on how to get a job, for instance. But on many things, so health, we have issues there. So I sit on the VAT panel, and we're talking about education, and I recently learned that 8% of South African children are stunted. 8%.
Yeah.
This should be an outcry, and it's not. So where's the policy failure here? Why did we focus on tertiary education when actually where we should be focusing our policies on our infrastructure and our funds on ensuring that basic education is actually speaking to feeding the tertiary education that we've now funded. So it's those policies that I think that there's a lack of coordination, and citizens don't know where to go.
But I want to pick up on this topic in a moment. If I want us to take us a short break. Is it okay? Sure. Is it all right?
Yeah.
Can we have a break? We'll continue, and we'll focus on education.